the assets that you're holding, whether they're in dollars, euros, or yen, will have a return that's significantly below the inflation rate. So there will be, all of those reserves will lose buying power. So that's what holding debt will be like. The things I would like to emphasize are the fundamentals in a very simple way. And they're the same for an individual, they're the same for a company, and they're the same for a country, because a country is just the aggregate of those. First, are you earning more than you're spending? So do you have a good income statement and balance sheet? And do you save well in the proper assets? Basics. Second, do you have internal conflict or harmony? Do you have something that creates productivity? So history has shown that if you educate your population well, you can measure this, but at education levels. Education means income, and also education in civility of how people behave with each other is very important, because the worst disruptive facts or circumstances is when they're at odds with each other and it becomes dysfunctional. So first, you have a good income statement and balance sheet? Second, do you have internal productive competition and harmony? And third, are you at risk of an international war? So as an investor, when I look around and say, where do I want to have my money nowadays? I look at those three things above all else. And of course, there are many indicators. When we deal with the developing world, there are many, many, many different circumstances, of course. What do you export? What do you import? All of those things. If you're exporting items that go up in value, commodities and so on, your circumstances are different than if you're importing those. So I can't make a generalization, but what I can say is those three factors. The more volatility, of course, you have in your income, the more important it is that you have a savings rate and you have that diversification of reserves and good savings, especially in this time. We are shifting the world. We moved from a world that was primarily resources were allocated on the basis of economic conditions and profitability, so that if it was economic to produce someplace, the capital would go there. And those who would earn the money would raise their living standards and so on. This is changing now, that the political or the geopolitical is more important than the economic profit system in allocating resources. So, for example, because that happened, we got Donald Trump becoming a populist because there was loss of jobs and so on. And those who want to fight for him are then exerting forces, whether it's protectionism or nationalism, that is having an effect. The fact that we have conflicts now between countries and the possibility of wars means that being self-sufficient for countries is more important than it was in the past, where we had a globalized economy where you would produce it and move it to the most efficient places. That's ending, not only because of the political aspects that I'm talking about for what it means in countries' incomes and so on, but also because of the need for self-sufficiency and the worries about foreign exchange controls or trade controls. For example, if you're producing in China, then there's the question, will that be sanctioned? Will you have the possibility, for example, that exports from China can be viewed like exports from Russia? And so companies that are producing there have these issues. So then they move or they operate in another way. So this is all very much less economic, less efficient in terms of the cost effectiveness. It contributes to a higher level of inflation, but it is part of this new world order. Internal conflict, and then even within that, the conflict issue, internal conflict and external conflict, will drive the resource allocation. So what you'll see even within countries, like within the United States, you are seeing movements from one state to another or one industry to another. So you're seeing this bifurcation. The reason people are moving from California to Texas or New York or Chicago to Florida has to do with the ideologies and the economics of that. Partially it's tax, but it's also partially ideological. People are now bidding for the ideological forces. For example, Elon Musk's buying Twitter is not entirely a commercial transaction. Whoever controls Twitter will probably have more impact on our society and its decisions than the Supreme Court. So there's a power that comes from these points of view and ideologies. And when you're having those conflicts, that's a bigger driver. And it's been true throughout history. I mean, when you come to wars or near war-like situations, they become command economies because they can't just satisfy the consumption needs of those who can spend the most. I think that there's something like a 40% probability that you will have a type of irreconcilable differences by the system leading to a type of civil war, meaning that law and democracy and our system as we know it. So in other words, I could imagine that we have a situation where neither political party accepts losing. I can imagine that the governance from the central government is ignored. In other words, that Supreme Court decisions are not followed by state and local governments. That you get into a power thing. In other words, make me. In other words, what is your exertion of power? I'm not going to follow that. How are you going to make me do that? Now that's very dangerous because it not only does it fragment the country, but it also makes the question of you're having a type of warfare. Now, how far that goes? Does that go to shooting? Does it not go to shooting? I mean, I don't think it goes to shooting, and I'm still only saying it's a 40% chance of this thing happening. I think we're at a juncture where we can change that. We can improve the odds. But let's say, but there are more guns in America than there are people. I mean, under the certain circumstances, who knows? I don't know where it goes, but I do think that it's a dangerously high probability. I don't make that 40% number out of the air. I use leading indicators of statistics. Now, I don't have a large enough sample size to have a high level of confidence, but the fact that we have that. What happened in terms of the January 6th incident was not a surprise. Shouldn't be a surprise. It's right out of the populist handbook. So as you see these things, there's the worry of that. And then there's, of course, the international conflict, which I would say is also a 40% chance that you can have a type of international war. We went through where we are in terms of the wars and sanctions and so on. Does that go to another level? I can't say. There are contentious issues, seeming irreconcilable differences.